Alright, so now we're going to be ranking rank 3 platoons. First up, the M4A176W. The M4A1 itself is not greatly armored. However, its gun is pretty good, so it's nice as a starter vehicle. You just need to remember to use cover wisely. The M6A1 does have a good gun, and I think a 37mm secondary gun, which is really helpful for taking out the tracks of the enemies that you're going to be going up against. However, as a heavy tank, it's kind of large for that category, and its armor isn't the greatest on the front. The M18 Hellcat, though, is really fast as a light tank, and its gun is pretty good, being able to destroy even things in an up tier if you're wise with your shot placement. The anti-air is kind of the same to the last platoon. It is a bit different, but the guns are pretty similar and it behaves pretty similar. Overall, for this platoon, just remember to be careful with your shot placements and do hide your tank when you're not shooting. I'd give this platoon a 7 out of 10. Next up is the Comet. Also like the M4A176W platoon, does have pretty good guns, but their armor is kind of lacking. The Comet itself is a good medium tank. The Challenger 1 also isn't really well armored, but it does have a pretty good penetration. However, if I remember correctly, they start out with Solid Shot, and Solid Shot isn't really great for post-penetration damage. As you level up more, you will get the shells with post-penetration damage, and that will be better for you. The Churchill is similar to the last Churchill, the Churchill NA75, even though this is the Churchill 7. It's well armored, the gun isn't really great, but overall it's just what you'd expect from a heavy tank at this battle rating. The Crusader anti-air does have a pretty slow reload for it only having one cannon. It's not super reliable, but the penetration of it does allow you to possibly shoot through some tanks if you get to the right flanking. Because of this anti-air not being great, and it has the same Churchill from before, with not the great penetration and overall lack of kind of armor, I'm going to give this platoon a 6 out of 10. I gave the M4A176W a higher rating though, because the M18 does lack armor, but it's really fast and it's got a really good gun, whereas the Challenger, which would be its counterpart, doesn't really have great speed, but it still has the penetration power. This platoon, I think, is hands down the best platoon for lower ranks. It is the EBR 1951 platoon, because this platoon is absolutely wild. There are so many good things about this platoon, and I'm going to try to list them all. First up, the EBR 1951 itself. It's very quick because it only has wheels. I'm going to classify it as a light tank. Its gun is pretty good for a light tank, and you can easily flank around heavier opponents. Plus it has smoke as well, which is really helpful in certain situations. Next up is the ARL-44. Now the ARL-44 has a gun that has 215 millimeters of penetration, even though it's just solid shot. It's on par with vehicles in rank 5, and it's better than the majority of vehicles in rank 4. So you shouldn't really have a problem going through tanks with the ARL-44, and because of that, it may seem a bit overpowered. Now, it is a heavy tank from the post-Second World War era, so that's why it has such good penetration. But the weaknesses are that it only has solid shot, and it's pretty slow. The armor on the front of the ARL-44 is also really strong. To properly get through it, you have to shoot at the turret cheeks. So if you don't do that, then it's going to destroy you really easily. So just keep that in mind. Besides that, the ARL is amazing. The M4A1 FL10 has the same turret as the AMX-13, and because it has the same turret, it also has the same autoloader. Now the autoloader is really helpful because it shortens your reload by a decent chunk, so you can easily shoot at enemies, and the oscillating turret does allow you to have good gun elevation and depression. The tank itself isn't as well armored. Regardless, it is still extremely good. The AMX-13 DCA-40, which is the anti-air of this platoon, is also really good. Its gun can allow you to go through the sides of some of the tanks that you're going to be going up against, and it's got a decent enough reload that it's good against anti-air. Overall, I'd say this platoon is a 10 out of 10, and it is the best platoon for the lower ranks. Also, if you feel like you're not leveling up as quickly as you want to, and you have a lot of gold on hand, you can spend it to level up your platoon quicker. There should be a button right about here on your screen if the option is there for your platoon. That is, if it's not already fully maxed. You can choose how much gold you want to spend. It'll give you options on how many levels to go up. I'd recommend getting to at least the 3rd vehicle in your platoon. Also, leveling up your platoon allows you to have more options in your artillery support, machine gun belts, and smoke screen. So that's something I suggest you guys will look into. To start the premium and event vehicles is the Excelsior. Now the Excelsior platoon I think is pretty nice. The Excelsior itself is a heavy medium tank like combination. If you're angled, it allows you to have really good armor, but the gun isn't like amazing like the ARL-44, but it's pretty good. The Sherman Firefly does allow you to shoot through a lot of enemies that you're going to go up against because it has pretty good shells. The armor on the Firefly isn't amazing. It will allow you to bounce some of the shells from the tanks that you're going to be going up against. The QF.73 RAM is like the truck, the Breda, I think, from the last video. It has a really good gun. It doesn't look like it would be great, but it does work really well. And it has amazing elevation to the point that if you have high explosive shells loaded and there's a plane coming at you, you can shoot it at the plane and it will most likely take down the whole plane if the shell hits. Which is nice because it's also paired with a pretty good anti-air with a very short reload. And the guns do quite well against the planes that you will be coming up against if they are flying. It's not anything crazy to the point that you should be going through tanks. Overall, I'm going to say this platoon is about an 8 out of 10. In regards to whether or not I recommend you buy it with gold, I'd say now is a good time if you have enough gold because there is currently the 50% off event. So if you want to, you can go ahead and buy it. But if you don't want to, or the offer is not currently there for 50% off, that's completely understandable. Next up is one of the rare platoons, one of the trophy ones, the T-34-57. The T-34-57 is quite well armored on the front and the gun is pretty nice. You can expect to bounce some shots from when you're going into a down tier. In an up tier, there is a chance that you won't be able to bounce as many shots. And just remember, you are a T-34, so your turret cheeks are kind of vulnerable. The KV-1E is an upgraded KV-1 with more armor. However, because it still has the same gun, with only 78mm of penetration, the penetration power on this tank isn't great. So even if you do have really strong armor, you have to kind of flank to get through a lot of the armor that you're going to be going up against. Especially in an up tier, it's not really reliable. And of course, there is the glaring issue with the KV tanks of its lower glacis plate being vulnerable to enemy fire, because if that part is exposed, a shot can easily go through it. So just play it carefully. I know it's a heavy tank, but it's not the best heavy tank because its gun isn't really good. However, the SU-100Y is quite nice. It has a naval gun on it, and the armor on the front is pretty good. Because of how the armor is, if you're turned at an angle, shots can go through the sides if you're looking too far left or too far right. So just be aware of that. And it does also have the issue like the KV-1E, where the lower glacis plate is vulnerable to enemy fire. But its penetration is really good, and you will see that if you have this platoon. Though technically still not as good as the ARL-44. The anti-air for this platoon is really fast firing, and is pretty good as an anti-air, but don't expect it to go through any of the tanks, because it only has 18mm of penetration, and it is lightly armored. So if you're going to use this anti-air, just make sure you're behind cover and you can't be seen by the enemy. So overall, I'm going to give this platoon a 7 out of 10. Lastly, and what I believe is one of the rarest platoons right now, is the KV-1C 756R. Now this platoon was available during this year's April Fool's event, and that's the only time it's been available so far. The KV-1C itself, besides having the common KV issue of the lower glacis plate not being really well armored, the rest of the armor on the front is really nice. The gun on it is good for a rank 3, and you won't have to worry about not going through enemies too much. The Puma is also really nice. For some reason it has heat shells, but you don't really want to use them because the armor piercing shells that it has are better. It is very quick as it is a self-propelled gun, and it is on wheels. And again, because of that, it has little to no armor, but it's really good at flanking if you can do that. The Jagdpanzer IV is pretty good with its frontal armor. The gun isn't amazing, but it's good for what it is. It is a heavier self-propelled gun, so as long as you're not being flanked, you won't have to worry about it being killed easily. The Ostwind is like the Wirbelwind, however it has a slower reload rate and only one gun, so you have to aim your shots a little bit more precisely. Because of that, it's not great, and its armor isn't really the best either. Regardless, this platoon as a whole is quite nice. I'm going to give it an 8 out of 10. Alright, thank you guys for watching. If I may ask of one thing, check out Courage is Found. It's a song I made and released recently. Besides that, I hope you guys have enjoyed this video, and I'll see you again in the next one.